Hello, students. This is Dr. Akanksha Kumar, and from the History Department of Janki Devi Memorial College. I will be lecturing on a topic called Tribes and Forest Dwellers, as you can see on your screen. This topic is from a paper called Investigating Inequalities, which is a BA program third year generic elective paper, GE paper, and it is mainly taught to, specifically taught to non-history students. So I will try to take you through the whole concept of, inequalities, with specifically with regards to tribes in Indian history. Uh, while talking about this particular paper, this paper covers the area of inherent inequalities in Indian society, from with regards to caste, gender, slavery, also in some senses, and of course tribes and other kinds of inequalities which exist in Indian society. So this paper kind of talks about investigating these inequalities. And for today's lecture, I'm going to be focusing on tribes and forest dwellers. As you can see on your screen, there's a small PPT which will talk about how the historical perspective of tribe has emerged, because we might be speaking about tribes from an anthropological perspective, or we may be studying it in sociology class. But from a historical perspective, how do we look at tribe and the tribal history? So here I wanted to actually focus on, or start with, the question of how the tribe and the tribal community was assimilated within the society, the larger society, you can say, during the pre-colonial and the colonial times. Now, while looking at what is a general overview of the term tribe from a historical perspective, if you see that Sangeeta Dasgupta, she says that the term Adivasi was preferred, or is a term which is preferred by the tribes, as preferred to the term tribes amongst the Adivasis, because she says that they did not, even accept the term, or the term original inhabitants. In fact, in 1938, the Adivasi Sabha, which was formed in Jharkhand, used this term Adivasi for the first time. And this is something which the Adivasi Samaj, or the tribes, prefer to call themselves or identify themselves with this term. So as we teach in modern Indian histories, the Adivasis have a long drawn history of colonial exploitation and resistance to the colonial exploitation, which was in the form of agrarian reforms, or land, agriculture. So if we look at the whole idea of how tribal population has emerged during the colonial and the pre-colonial period, as we teach in modern India also, that they had a history of resistance, right? They had a history of protest and resistance, which is there. So they claim a resistance against colonial rule. They were fighting against the rights of land. They were fighting against colonial economic exploitation during the colonial times. So as visibly noted by Banerjee also, that Adivasi is something which is very different from the term scheduled tribes, which is something which is scheduled them within one particular list of tribes, but they want a more freely, something which describes them more in a more loose, free sense, where there are multiple inclusions within the term of Adivasi rather than just scheduled tribes. As Zaza also explains, that Adivasis see themselves as part of the same community based on emotional bonds. So it's not really just scheduled tribes, but they see themselves based on emotional bonds. Whether a particular group is officially recognized as a scheduled tribe in the constitution or not, they see themselves as a different kind of bonding which is there within them. If you look at the tribal communities, specifically with regards to this paper, I thought that there are two articles which are mentioned in the syllabus, which need to be probably discussed here in the context of, if you look at the historical context of tribes. One is K.S. Singh, Colonial Transformation of Tribal Society in Middle India in 1978, and the other is Chetan Singh, Conformity and Conflict, Tribes and the Agrarian System of Mughal India in 1988. Both these are mentioned in the reading list of the paper and which probably need to be discussed here. So if you discuss both these articles, what are they actually saying? They are saying that the concept of tribe, especially if you look at in the 19th century or even in the pre-colonial period, uh, Chetan Singh, he talks about the agrarian system in the Mughal India. He talks about the agrarian system in the Mughal India, and he points out that there was actually a continued participation of the populations in the socio-economic processes of the fundamental stabilization of agrarian society in the economic processes. There was the tribal population were participating, they were part of it, even during the Mughal period. And of course, continuing to the colonial period. So it's not something which was out of, the history or out of the historical context. So this is what he's writing about. Chetan Singh also says that the tribal population were not irrelevant to the Mughal agrarian system. Village communities of the Mughal India were probably, living in very close proximity to the tribal societies. So these are the kind of points that he's making while studying. And he also mentions another important point that during the medieval period, there are, historians who have generally been inclined towards ignoring the contribution of tribal societies within, historical writing or within the communities. So this is because of the problem of establishing a working relationship, according to him, between the concept of tribe, caste, peasant, and so on and so forth. So modern scholars on medieval Indian history have chosen to underplay the tribes as a distinct entity, according to him, and they accommodated them in other categories. So he is here asserting for a different history writing with a different identity for the tribals in that sense, which I will come to in the later part of this lecture, where scholars like Tiplut Nongray, even Sangeeta Dasgupta, Guha, Sakaria, they are talking about a separate history writing and, the new emerging field, which is a very young emerging field. So I'll just come to that during the end part of my lecture. But here I'm focusing on these two articles, which are part of the syllabus. So modern scholars of medieval Indian history have chosen to underplay the tribes as a distinct entity and accommodated them in other categories. He, Chetan Singh, he actually focused on Punjab, and his center was of medieval India. And he says that there was a structural change in the tribal societies that could have been a matter of concern for tribals. A close relationship between the tribal and the pastoral with the sedentary and commercialized agrarian society of medieval Punjab is something that he's talking about. So there was a close relationship between the pastoral, the tribal, and also when when agrarian society was being commercialized, is something which is where the tribal societies were kind of assimilated in. So at the political level, if we talk about and of course both these scholars, and especially with regards to the colonial period, you can't ignore the role of missionaries, the issues of conversion and so on and so forth. The missionaries were close collaborators of the colonial administration, and we know the British justified their rule and created a new wave of support to the backward communities of India through the Christian missionaries, who were very loyal subjects to the British. And after 1860, the official policy of non-interference in religious matters was broken. So, which was not to be, applied to the tribal population as well. So it was not applied to the tribal population, and they were outside the Hindu-Muslim, whatever realm. So here, the British, sorry, the Christian missionaries obviously played a role in conversions. Now, K.S. Singh, on the other hand, in his article on tribal society in Middle India, and he talks about the colonial transformation of tribal societies, and he says that there was an uneven impact of colonialism, which could be understood with the specificities of local structured, which would be included within the tribals. First, I mean, if you look at pre-colonial to moving, kind of a pre-colonial period flowing into the Mughal flowing into the colonial period, pre-colonial to the colonial period, Mughal period. First, there was colonization and establishment of settlements by peasant castes who were encouraged by the Mughal rulers and zamindars to reclaim land and offered various incentives for the perspective to them. So we know about, Bhils, Meenas, Kolis, Gonds, who became dominant communities during the Mughal period. And we know they were the ones who were dominant in the Rajputana areas also, like Gujarat, Rajasthan, parts of Madhya Pradesh as well. So tribes under the British rule, according to K.S. Singh, tribes under the British rule, if you see, a large part of the tribal region and most of the tribal population were integrated within the administration, right? So it was that, there was modernization of tribes as an ethnic community, which developed in several stages. The main features of this were that, first the tribes the British were actually a paternalistic rule with district officers, and the tribes needed a government by men, not by a system. So the tribal, keeping tribal areas out of operation of regulation, laws, etc., which were alien to tribal ethos and undermined it. So there were lots of regulations which were coming about during the British period, and it was very difficult to obviously keep them totally aloof from them. So there were special agrarian laws in the beginning. The tribals protested against the British also with the establishment of regular administration in their areas, colonization of tribal regions, which had begun in the medieval period itself. And as mentioned earlier, this process, which began in the Mughal period, got accelerated in the colonial period. So these are the major points that are being made by K.S. Singh and Chetan Singh, and they're actually saying that the assimilation of both in the pre-colonial and colonial period took place during this time. So as already mentioned, Chetan Singh, he talked about the continued participation of tribal population in the social processes, which was fundamental to the agrarian society. The tribal population, as you can see on your screen, the 3 points that are mentioned by Chetan Singh here are that the tribal people were not irrelevant to the Mughal agrarian system. Village communities of Mughal India probably lived in close proximity to tribal societies. And according to him, scholars of medieval India have generally ignored this history. Now coming to K.S. Singh, his article, Colonial Transformation in Tribal Society. Therefore, in the middle, he's talking about Middle India, which is Central India. He says that tribal society lost its unique character, like other castes and communities. Tribals were transformed by colonialism in a very profound sense, according to him, right? So there was an uneven impact of colonialism, which, as already mentioned, which had, a certain, in pockets had certain effects on certain communities, tribal communities. Now, next, I would like to come to the question of the meaning of this term, tribe. How do we look at it? According to David Hardiman, the term Adivasi is different from the term tribe. This is something that I touched upon earlier also in this lecture, is because it doesn't really carry the same evolutionary process. David Hardiman actually stresses on the point that there was a specific historical context, an event, and the subjugation of diverse communities during the 19th century. And this 19th century actually has a history of resistance, where we have the Birsa Munda or the Santhal and several other, tribal protests which were there and which are taught as part of British rule in India in the modern India paper. For the sake of this paper, I mean, I'm not going into the detail of those because, of course, they're not part of the syllabus directly, but as a background study, you can find them. These are factual, references. You can find them in any basic modern Indian history textbook. For those who have not studied Indian history probably and are not history students specifically, might want to go back and revisit these small little tribal communities and protests in different areas, especially Madhya Pradesh and Jharkhand, Chota Nagpur, and these are the places where tribal protests and resistance actually took place. So they wanted to be independent and relatively free from external control. This is what he's saying, and that is where the term Adivasi and the acceptance of this term comes up. During colonial times, there were traders, moneylenders, landlords, Jain community also, was moving, very mobile with the support of colonial authorities. So they exploited the new legal system to take away land from the Adivasis. Is also very much prevalent if you study uh, the the history of certain tribal areas, especially if you look at the whole issue, the whole social composition of Jharkhand today. You can see how the tribal population were probably kind of taken over or wiped out in certain areas by migrant communities. So, Adivasi or tribe. Now, Sangeeta Dasgupta, a recent scholar, and Roycroft both, they highlight the importance of acknowledging that various social groups, when identifying themselves as Adivasi, they asserted their rights to both material and symbolic resources. So what are they saying? That they have their own separate identity, they assert their rights, and so on and so forth. This, according to them, kind of gives them a legitimacy that cannot be overlooked. We should not overlook that legitimacy. It also requires, an in-depth study, which, scholars like Sangeeta Dasgupta have said that this is an emerging field, and in-depth study is very much still relevant in history writing for them. So there are numerous historical representations, debates, and disagreements amongst the scholars who are writing about tribal and Adivasi history. Sangeeta Dasgupta then suggests that figures such as, she actually makes an important point that, figures such as Ambedkar, Phule, Periyar revived the effort to rewrite history of caste and reshape the concept of India as a modern democracy during this process. According to her, Dalit literature and autobiographies today can be regarded as an important source of authentic information about Dalit experiences and realities, and writing or rewriting of Dalit history. It doesn't entirely have to be dependent upon archival records, because there are oral histories which can play an important role, and I'll come to that in a second while talking about writing tribal history itself also. So tribal communities were unable to revive a similar historical narrative for themselves. And what have scholars writing about tribal history actually said about this? Coming to the next slide, people like Tiplut Nongroy in 2006 actually asserted that the shared experiences, and here I'll quote her, the shared experiences of exploitation, discrimination, powerlessness among tribal and indigenous peoples with the general population are self-evident, and they really require no documentary or archival evidence. So this is a very important and assertive point that these scholars are making, that there is no requirement of, a very strong requirement of documentary evidence is not there, because the tribal exploitation and discrimination is self-explanatory. So we don't actually need that kind of, argument or, history writing in that direction. That can be done otherwise. People like Ruby Hembron in 2017, they underscored this idea by stating that we are living documents ourselves. The tribal population who might be rewriting their own history can be living documents themselves. And this dismisses the significance of colonial and post-colonial archival records and the historian's expertise. So the colonial and the post-colonial, and I started off with K.S. Singh and Chetan Singh, and they've both used colonial and post-colonial, evidences to prove what they're saying about the assimilation of tribal population or the history writing of the tribals within the colonial and the pre-colonial period. But here he's saying that the historian's expertise does not have to rely completely on colonial and post-colonial archival records. So this is another important point that Ruby Hembron has made regarding the rewriting and writing of tribal history. So presently, Adivasi scholars like Bhukya, there is, Mins, and others also, who are saying that they're increasingly highlighting the value of an alternative archive, an oral archive, for revising Adivasi histories. They compensate for the deficiencies of the colonial archive. So they're saying that the colonial archive might not have things that these sources can actually give you. So they're actually trying to say that we should come out of the traditional historical binaries. We should come out of the traditional historical history writing processes to actually write history of this community. uh, and parallels have been drawn with the Dalit movement, where autobiographies and other source materials have been used to write their history, right? So the Adivasi experiences and the communities and their maybe their tribal culture, their food, um, their different forms of culture like folk culture and expressions within their folk songs and other things can also be taken up to write their history. Maybe this is a point which they are trying to make here. So there are just some thoughts that I thought are very interesting while we teach and learn about this paper, is that carving a new identity for the field of Adivasi studies themselves. There are around 5 points that I thought should be left as points of discussion for a classroom while studying these points. One is, of course, relatively a younger field. The first point is, of course, that this is relatively a younger field, where scholars like Sangeeta Rajgupta in her article have also mentioned that uh, writing of Adivasi history is a relatively younger field. But how do we go about writing this? And we've talked about the writing of Adivasi history just now in the earlier slides, where they're talking about the colonial archive, the alternative to the colonial archive, pre-colonial and colonial times. I tried to highlight and kind of take this lecture from the colonial period history writing of K.S. Singh, who were writing the 70s and the 80s, Chetan Singh, and then, of course, others like Guha, Sakaria, Sangeeta Dasgupta, who have been writing recently about this. So they're actually saying that, this is an emerging field, evolving. It requires more probably thought, history rewriting. The other question is that it probably requires an identity assertion emergence by these people and the tribals, because they will have their own emergence. A recent example of that is, of course, Jharkhand. Historiography for writing this history. Historiography for writing this history should also be discussed while teaching this topic in this paper. I thought is a point that we should discuss here, because historiography is probably changed from the time of the 70s and the 80s when the historians were writing this history. I mean, historians who are specifically specializing in this field will know better that history writing has probably changed, or it is changing, or it requires to be changed, as we see in the arguments of Nong Broy and others who are talking about an alternative way of writing this history, whether it be oral or otherwise. Then, of course, the very important point that Sangeeta Dasgupta made is its dialogues with other movements, such as the Dalit movements, and the writing of history by non-tribal is another question that leaves you, because now there are, intelligentsia, there are Dalit intellectuals, and there are others also emerging, not much, but it is still emerging in the field of tribal studies also. So how about writing this history from a personal experience rather than just others writing it for you? So these are some of the points that I thought should be discussed in a history classroom, where we are talking about the writing of history of the Adivasis and the inherent inequalities which exist in Indian society, which have existed, and not just confining history writing to how the laws are there to protect us today from such inequalities, but also trying to look at how, because being a history class, how does pre-colonial and colonial periods, treat the history writing of inequalities, and one of these being, of course, the tribal history. So this is where I thought that, these are important points that probably need to be discussed. And this lecture was designed to cater to the syllabus, which is probably limited to two articles, K.S. Singh and Chetan Singh. and talking about the pre-colonial, the colonial periods, and how they are, there are many changes which are taking place within the Adivasi communities. And then coming to the recent history writings on tribal studies, and which has been called Adivasi studies in the recent times, people like Sangeeta Das Gupta and others. So it's very important not to ignore some of these things. Like if we talk about, the period of Adivasi studies becoming increasingly visible in the subjects of debates, as we know, and we started with, that Sangeeta Das Gupta also in her article mentions that there are debates amongst the tribal scholars also around the issue of conversion. There are debates around issue of identity, their indigenous identity or their development and these are all subfields of Adivasi studies, according to her. They were centered around Adivasi, subject of Adivasi studies, and they have increasingly become relevant in the recent times. So this is something which is saying, and as a newly emerging field, it engages with other fields as well, like archaeology, anthropology, of course, sociology, then environmental history, then subaltern studies, then indigenous studies, then there is also Aboriginal studies, there's developmental economics for that matter, and there are debates that are specific to the Indian context in these regions. But here again, I would say that, of course, there are so many fields which are emerging, but where do you specify and teach this to a history student in a history class? I tried to kind of bring about those historiography also to this lecture. So the concept of tribe, as we know, especially when, where I started this lecture, is if we talk about pre-colonial to colonial times in the 19th century, is viewed in the colonial records as one-step evolutionary process. Because here is where the history writing actually kind of started for, K.S. Singh and Chetan Singh and others who are writing about this historiography. A society different from a caste-based society, different in the sense that it was seen as a primitive and a backward, quote unquote backward. So the understanding of tribal evolved over time due to various factors, such as there were official perspectives, and we've discussed this a little bit in the last few slides about how history writing is not going to be solely dependent on the colonial archive of this particular community. Tribal, when talking about Adivasi studies, changing racial assumptions, tensions, anthropology, colonial governance, colonial ideologies played an important role. All of these need to be taken into consideration by history students if they want to study these, or if they are interested in exploring this further. So we know that there were colonial discourses. Instead of creating an imaginary, they actually for the colonial portrayal of tribal people as simple in need of protection had some historical truth, according to her also, that there was something that was probably needed to protect them, and that is where the colonial intervention actually started, right? So, of course, like I said, there were other scholars, not just Sangeeta Das Gupta, but also like others like Guha and Sakaria, who highlight the complex interconnected social realities of the social interrelationships which existed between these before colonization and which were overshadowed by the concept of tribe alone. So they are making an important point here that we cannot just limit them to the concept of tribe, but also highlight the point that Adivasi studies is emerging as a new and important field of study here. So this is something that I wanted to highlight for all of you in this lecture today. And this is where, I want to leave the students with this thought that this is something that they can also explore further, especially those who are going to higher studies. And if they have any curiosity or enthusiasm for studying this particular topic, they can actually go and research these names, historiography, and historical writings regarding the changing evolutionary process of tribal history writing. So thank you.